Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to our November YouTube live session on the health equity and the artificial kidney. I'm Elizabeth Gress. I'm our Director of Partnerships, Communications, and Regulatory Affairs for the Kidney Project. And we are really excited to be here today with Dr. Cynthia Delgado, who is a professor of medicine at UC San Francisco, and also a practicing nephrologist at the San Francisco Department of Veterans Affairs Health System. Dr. Delgado is also an associate chief of nephrology for clinical operations and the director of the dialysis program at the SFVA. And she is a national expert in health outcomes research for kidney disease, and also the chair of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the American Society of Nephrology. We're really excited to have her today with us, talking with Dr. Roy about health equity and artificial kidneys. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to them.
Liz, thank you so much. Cynthia, Dr. Delgado, I'll call you Cynthia. Welcome to our fireside chat. We call it fireside, although there's no fire in any form. So it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Kidney Project. You and I have talked about what we do, and I'm so excited you joined us today to talk a little bit about health equity in general, especially with kidney disease. And specifically, we want to learn from you and how it may relate to the artificial kidney. So welcome.
I'm happy to be here. And Liz, thank you for that very warm introduction.
Well, maybe to get our audience a little bit familiar with you, can you share with our audience a little bit about yourself, your clinical work at the VA, as well as your interests, both research and policy and clinical?
Yeah, as you all can tell by Liz's listings, I have many hats. I am a professor of medicine here at the University of California of San Francisco. I am based out of the San Francisco VA. I started here in 2007 with my training, and then just fell in love with how we care for patients here and never left. Apart from my local responsibilities, which include working within the VA network to help support the care of veterans within our current facility and the facilities across our catchment area. I also am the chair of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee for the American Society of Nephrology, and served as the co-chair of the task force to reassess the role of race in kidney function estimation. My research is primarily in quality of life and healthcare outcomes. I focus my work on trying to improve the health and the healthcare of patients. One of my core, drives as a nephrologist is the fact that I feel like patients should feel like they are individuals first who happen to have chronic kidney disease, and not chronic kidney disease patients who have who are individuals, meaning that it's not in the forefront of your lives. And that comes from my own family experience of many aunts and uncles who have also had chronic kidney disease.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so was it that some of the reasons you were inspired to work with kidney, and were there any specific reasons why the VA population in particular?
Yeah, actually, it was kind of funny. I did my residency training at Mount Sinai in New York. And originally I was headed to become a gastroenterologist, and a mentor there noticed that I was very much in love with how the kidneys work and how, body pH affects people's lives and such. And she turned to me and she said, Mija, I really think you should be a kidney specialist. And I switched gears, and I have never looked back. It's something that I really very much enjoy. Working for the VA has been really, it's been something that's been a sort of like a journey of discovery of love. The veteran population is an underserved patient population. They are so appreciative of the things that you do for them, and are so underserved in a lot of rural areas that it just makes it even that much more rewarding to be able to do what we do for them in our current capacity in the VA. So it's been really a great experience working for the VA and being able to maybe have a little bit of an effect on the quality of life of our veterans here.
So you actually mentioned something about, the veteran population that's often not talked about when you talk about, new innovations in technology, at least when you've even talked in kidney and other technologies as well. So this is very nice to hear of your focus in that area, and would love to learn more today. One place I want to start off is, we use the term equity, inequity. Can you please tell us a little bit more about what that actually means, and what are some of the key issues with respect to kidney disease and kidney failure, ESRD in particular?
Well, the CDC defines health equity as achieving health access or opportunity for any individual to their full health potential, such that no one is disadvantaged from achieving that potential because of any social position or socially determined difference or construct. The health inequities are reflected in differences in length of life for patients, quality of life for patients, rates of disease, disability, access to home care, and risk of death. And particularly in nephrology, we know that African American individuals are 3 times more likely to end up on dialysis than other individuals from other ethnic backgrounds. But Latinos are also at risk. Individuals from Native American backgrounds are at risk. And there's a real health disparity, even to begin with the rates of diabetes and hypertension and underrepresented groups of individuals. But apart from that, there's also the nuance of disparities related to your geographic location. It could be that your healthcare system is, an hour's drive away, and that may, represent a disparity in of itself if you're trying to get your care, or even further. So, there are other things like, the rurality of your location, access to a physician in more rural areas. There are also major factors in healthcare equity, as we call it. And so, we have a lot of work to do with regards to those sorts of disparities. And then, of course, many people talk about, in recent years, we've been talking about things that are called as social determinants of health that affect someone's ability to thrive in their healthy life, such as sometimes your primary language might be a barrier, food security, being able to put food on the table, being able to actually work a full-time job with benefits that include health insurance, your ability to remain employed, educational level. All of those things factor into your healthcare, and there are plenty of studies that have shown that those aspects of social life are intricate into the health disparities.
Seems to me that health disparities fall under there's a bigger issue, not just the fact that it's your genetics. There's social determinants, as you've mentioned. Maybe your access to the right type of care when you're younger, preventive care. And can you talk a little bit about whether these are more elevated in kidney disease versus others, or because it's kidney disease, you have to pay special aspects to some of these determinants?
Well, I think, how do I answer that? I'll say this. I think chronic kidney disease for many people is sort of the endpoint of many other chronic disease burdens. And so the role that social constructs play in that is ongoing and eventually affect every health system you have, right? Of course, I'm biased as a nephrologist, and I'll say that the kidney health is the most important thing in the whole world for us to be focused on. But truthfully, I do believe that these healthcare social determinants do affect every aspect of healthcare, including folks who do not have chronic kidney disease, such as folks who have heart disease or folks who have diabetes without kidney disease. It's just unfortunate that in the end, even heart disease and folks with diabetes, if they don't get the proper access to care and they don't get, they aren't as healthy as they can be for other reasons, and oftentimes end up with chronic kidney disease.
Well, we'll come back to this, but I know you have played a key role in our recent changes to eliminate the use of race-based GFR algorithms.
Mm-hmm.
Would you please tell our audience a little bit about the background of that algorithm is, why it's important, and how have this change been made, and what are some of the results?
Sure. As early as 1976, we providers, scientists, have been looking for a way to understand what someone's kidney function is. And the earlier research was based on information that was ascertained from a group of people, a group of 249 men who were of the same racial and ethnic background. Based on that information, a equation was derived from doing a lot of assessments of how much, what their kidney function might be with testing of using proteins that we could test for. And we came up with this equation. That equation was further refined years later to create something called the estimated glomerular filtration rate, the eGFR. And there were studies that show that there were differences in serum creatinine measurement, which is the main marker of kidney function, that there were differences between individuals who were of African-American descent versus folks who were not of African-American descent. There wasn't a really clear reason why, and there wasn't really clearly established that there weren't differences in other ethnic groups. But based on that, the equation that was used to estimate what someone's kidney function was included what we call a coefficient or a corrector for African-American race. Now, the question from us was, how do you apply that generally in a network of healthcare facilities without really knowing what someone's ethnic background is? Like, you all are looking at me and you may not know that I'm Puerto Rican, and technically I am a descendant of folks who came from Africa and also descendants of folks who came from Spain and Italy. So how would you apply that equation to someone like me, or someone who is half white or half black? Or is it even fair to apply that equation with a correction to folks who are African American without us really knowing if a correction is needed for other groups? So, race is a social construct, not a biological one. And so the question was raised as to why we would even need it in the first place. And it may have contributed to bias in healthcare. It may have contributed to bias in transplant evaluation, to initiation of dialysis. So a task force was put together by the National Kidney Foundation and the American Society of Nephrology to evaluate a way to create an estimating equation, or find an estimating equation. We didn't create it. We identified an approach that didn't include race, because in the end, we all have to be able to assess kidney function and do the right thing by our patients without hurting them, and making assessments that include things that we don't really need. So we ended up, over a year and a half's time, we evaluated 26 different approaches that some included race, some did not include race. We had something like, I don't remember the entire number right now, but something like 80 some odd individuals, scientists and individuals, to present to our committee and go over the science behind things and to really give us a sense of what was going on. We took things apart. We looked at all the clinical consequences, including clinical decision-making for medications, for whether or not a person would be barred from getting an X-ray or an MRI because of the contrast and the kidney function, or whether someone would change someone's eligibility for participation in research. And we looked at multiple different things. We did a lot of simulations using existing information to determine what would be the best path forward that would not create another bias for anybody at all, but would also be a fair step forward for everyone, kind of dividing out what what we would consider the perfect approach would be, kind of balancing it out for everyone. So, at the end of the year and change time, we found an equation that was put forth that did not include race, had a good a profile with regards to its accuracy, because you want to make sure that the approach is accurate. And we put that approach forward as the first step in assessing kidney function. Now, that equation was based on something called the serum creatinine. Serum creatinine is constantly produced in the body. It's a byproduct of muscle metabolism. And everybody has serum creatinine rolling around in their veins. And so it's a good marker of assessment of kidney function. But there are other markers of kidney function assessment, including Cystatin C, which is a different kind of biological marker that's rolling around in our veins as well. And that marker, the task force felt that marker should be put forward for use as well. But there have been a couple of barriers to fully utilizing that, including there not being enough, there's not a Medicare determination for payment of that. And so ordering that a lot may actually be, not helpful for patients because the cost of each one of those tests is very high. So we're working on advocating currently on using Cystatin C to bring down the cost so that everybody can have access to it. And it was definitely one of the strongest parts of our recommendation to roll that assay out and make sure that we all have access to it too for further refinement of kidney function estimation. And then finally, we need more research in healthcare disparities and to understand why differences currently exist and what we can do to address those differences to make healthcare equitable in nephrology. So that's a nutshell of almost 2 years worth of work.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. There's so much information there, it's packed. I'm going to drill down on a couple of things, but
yeah,
what sort of strikes me right when you started was 249 males.
Yeah.
Set the standard for what we do. We just recently crossed 8 billion people in the world.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's about 1 billion people with kidney disease. So 249 homogeneous population effectively has set the standard for what we do with almost 1 billion people and probably even more, right?
Yeah, I mean that was in 1976, yeah. Right? And then, was it 1998 we had a different equation, but we really need folks to participate in research for this very reason, right? We need all walks of life to participate, because if we only have one group of individuals participating in this sort of work, then we don't have what we call the solution may not necessarily be applicable to everybody in the world, right? And so the more folks participate in research, the more applicable the result is to the individual, right? So that was, one of the most striking things for me. They didn't even have women in this first one, right? And so, Dr. Levy and colleagues who, came up with a whole different equation really did do their best with what the information that they had at the time. But then they've evolved. And this, to me, the decision that we put forth now is just the next evolution and making sure that healthcare delivery is fair and equal across multiple groups of individuals, but we have more work to do.
So how, in this effort to change this, how easy or how hard has it been to sort of have people come to this recognition that that did not work, and we are moving to this? Is this causing a lot of upheaval within the community, or have you pretty much crossed over that? And what has to be done?
Well, I'll say this: the calls to the first calls that asked about why we even had the race coefficient in the equation in the first place came in 2017, and the more recent calls that really forced the community to really push forward really came as a result of all the injustices that we all saw on television during the pandemic that were happening across the US, including Mr. Floyd. And so what I think about this change in terms of how it's evolving, how hard it was, I think everyone was, because the two major societies for kidney care were really involved in making sure we get this right, that led to a whole network of communications for implementation that was primed for the result. It made it very, not 100% easy, but fairly smooth for transitions. So for instance, the VA adapted the equation within months. And a lot of the major laboratory organizations also were ready to go and waiting for us to give them an answer, and they adapted the equation fairly quickly. Most of all of the academic medical centers adapted the equation as well. And the real challenge now is just focusing, that was the first recommendation, and the real challenge now is really focusing in on getting Cystatin C uploaded. And I mean, I've traveled across the US. I was in Kansas City, Missouri, and there are still some challenges. The bigger labs are primed with this. There are still some challenges for providers with who rely on smaller labs, and we're working through it.
So actually, I'm going to ask you a little bit about Cystatin C. Our audience is very diverse, international. I think many of them know urea, they know creatinine. Most of them may not have heard of C. So can you take us through Cystatin C, what that is, and how that relates to the other biomarkers people usually hear of, urea, creatinine?
Well, Cystatin C is actually quite an interesting protein. It's actually part of, it's a protein that's was originally identified in neurons. And it's constantly created at a fairly constant basis. The reason why it's a better biomarker of kidney function is that it's not as, how do you say, malleable to changes in body composition. So if you gain muscle mass or lose muscle mass, the number isn't going to change as much as creatinine does, because creatinine is directly related to muscle mass. And so it makes it more of a stable marker of kidney function, so that we can create an equation around it, which Leslie Anker and colleagues have done. The interesting thing, though, is that by itself, Cystatin C is not as accurate as it is when you plug it into an equation together with creatinine. And I think eventually we will, just like the cardiologists have out there, that when you have heart disease or you're having a heart attack, you get 3 tests done to check if you're actually having a heart attack by blood test. Eventually in kidney world, we'll probably have something like 3 markers to test to see what's going on with your kidney function as well. I think we're headed in that direction. So Cystatin C is it's a fair biomarker of kidney function, and we currently I think we need some more work to understand how you might utilize it in the inpatient setting, because when you're hospitalized, your body functions are all in uproar. You might be hospitalized because you have a big infection, or you might be hospitalized because you're having major surgery, and that causes a kind of a jolt to your body and may change how your chemistry is for a short period of time. And we're not 100% sure that we know how that's going to affect Cystatin C.
No, thank you. And I think this is really important for our audience, that they know there's a new biomarker that's a more accurate, or combined with creatine is more accurate assessment of kidney function. So you talked about it being more expensive, or it has to get coverage.
Yeah.
How much of that is because the labs that do this testing, is it because they need new equipment, or is it because it's much more elaborate? What causes this inability or inequity in sort of getting access to this test?
So it really is set by Medicare. And now I'm going to share my screen with you guys to show you what I mean.
Absolutely.
Because really, there are two issues with Cystatin C. I'm going to start with the first slide I usually use when I'm teaching about this. Let me see if I could share my screen. I have lots of screens here, so you'll have to bear with me to figure out which one I want to use here. Give me 1 second.
No worries. This is really exciting, and this is really helpful for us to understand the kinds of work that's being done. So we'll relate this to some of how it may help us as we move forward. So, but please share your screen and take us through.
Okay, let me share. If I can see what I'm doing here. Sharing screen 3, I think. No, not sharing. Oh no, sharing screen 2. That's what we want to share. Sorry, I'm a few sandwiches short of a picnic today. I'm just coming back from a long Thanksgiving road trip. All right, so, okay, like we said, Cystatin C is a lot more expensive, and there are several things that happen within the medical world that make it, that you haven't really been able to sort of integrate Cystatin C into, like, point of care testing and that sort of thing. But the interesting part is that Medicare, well, before I go to Medicare, let's talk about the labs. So at the bottom, you see a little table that shows creatinine, serum creatinine, and Cystatin C. This is a College of American Pathologists survey that sort of asks all the labs across the United States what they have access to in terms of what tests they can do in their lab. And so creatinine by and large can be done in 5,902 labs, whereas Cystatin C can only be done in about 185 labs as of 2020. So that's one impediment, right? That not everybody can actually do the test. The assay for doing everything is already standardized. It's just a matter of getting it acquired in the lab. So that is one impediment. But the more concerning impediment for me as a healthcare provider is this. Medicare sets the reimbursement rate for everything that happens in the hospital setting and in the outpatient setting. And if you're a Medicare recipient, this is how we code things after we see you in our clinic. The lab codes tests after they've drawn your blood for reimbursement by Medicare. And Medicare has set the reimbursement rate for creatinine to be something like $5.12. And the true cost is somewhere between 10 cents and $2.50 for any time someone draws your blood for creatinine. But you don't really see those costs in the back end because this is all what's happening behind the scenes. But Cystatin C is 3 times more expensive, or more than 3 times more expensive, and the true cost is somewhere between $5 and $10. So what that means is, because there's no control, no ceiling for how much an institution can charge for it, that's what this is. If Medicare doesn't actually set a standard rate at which they can charge for something, private insurance companies are allowed to charge whatever they want, which is a problem. So that's one of the things that is really concerning for me that we really need to work on, because I certainly don't want to test someone with a lab assay that, yes, is great, and once we make it available across the US can be done. But at the end of the day, if you end up with a bill that's thousands of dollars for this one test, is it really worth it if the bang for your buck really isn't going to be that high compared to serum creatinine? So that's some of the things you have to think about. And a lot of our patients are already struggling financially because the burden of chronic kidney disease financially is hard. So that's some of the stuff that we still need to work on to improve the access to this test.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, is there a role where new technology can help reduce the cost of those tests or make it easier to get the tests done? Do you see any scenario where innovators in technology might help address that?
Yeah, I mean, I think over time, innovators in technology can help us with finding ways to make this a point of care test. With the reimbursement side, that's really more of a health policy advocacy work, which is my other hat. I'm trying to work on improving that by informing our government system that this needs to be done, and it's really vital, which the American Society of Nephrology is working on. But I do think that improving access, yes, our colleagues out there, such as yourself, if there are some innovators out there who know how to refine and improve access to this test, I mean, I would love to see something like a, pinprick of blood assessment of kidney function with just, with both measurements programmed into the system. That would be incredible. Because the blood draw each time and going to the blood draw place, all of those steps are a burden to our patients.
Well, that's fascinating. And I think this is maybe a segue for how you can advise us on what steps we as innovators can take, say in our case, the kidney project, building an implantable artificial kidney, to think about the equity issues ahead of time or while developing this, so that it doesn't get to the point, it's going to be there, but nobody can afford it, or it becomes impractical. So how might you sort of think about what is somebody like us in the kidney project? What can we do at this stage to make sure that we do not bias ourselves in a way that makes it extra hard once we've developed it to make this available to others?
That's a good question. I'm not even sure I know I have an answer for it. I think with most things, innovation, new things are by and large more expensive at the beginning than, they become more affordable over time. I would say that we should advocate that we have plenty of NIH dollars supporting the work, such that the results of the work are more, can be delivered to a broader audience at a lower rate, I would say. So I'm advocating for more NIH dollars for the work. I think that the more we invest in ourselves in trying to find a solution, the better off our patients will be. But I mean, it does become a challenge if, we're not putting our heads together, industry folks, scientists, clinicians, patients, and finding the right middle ground with some advisory from all parties involved to make sure that the access is equitable across multiple factions of life. I'm not sure I have a specific answer to the question, because I think that has multiple levers.
Yeah, no, I think you're bringing up something interesting. So, as you have heard from me, and as you'll see in the questions that Liz is going to bring up, people asking, when is this going to be available? Is it suitable for me as this type of patient? Is it available to me in this part of the country, in this part of the world?
Yeah.
And we're still far away from that. But one of the things that sort of brought to my attention is we need to get input from those folks. So, for example, if we're making something that is so expensive that will just be treating maybe one very thin slice of the population, and whereas if we had thought about different ways to get input, maybe we can make it broader. And so one of the thoughts I had initially when I started on this was, I want to work on developing a transplant replacement. Okay?
Right.
So that is, but then what I heard from a lot of the patients was, that's great, that's a noble goal. And what they told me was, don't let yourselves get so ahead in working, just fix it on that you might be able to do other things with your technology
Right.
that can help us in the short term.
Right.
And to me, that struck because I'm like, what does that actually mean? I was thinking, as a technology person, engineer, I'm working towards this final goal. But somebody said, look, we just can't travel.
Our patients are real, right?
Yeah, we just need a better quality of life. Somebody said, look, we're trying to make it, we already have such a low quality that anything you do that is not perfect will still be helpful.
Yeah.
So that actually brought us to the idea that maybe we do not need to create a perfect replacement.
No.
Yeah, get to something that can provide better travel, better diet availability, better sort of quality of life, and that may help. For that, we went and did a patient survey, and we've talked to groups like the American Association of Kidney Patients. We've talked to people in Home Dialysis United, and that's one way of trying to get input. I don't know what you think about that sort of an approach, and if there's something we should be doing beyond just that as well.
Well, I think the patients that you spoke to hit the nail on the head, to be frank. Something is better than nothing. And, if it means that it's a shorter period of time, a wait time to get something more feasible in the shorter period of time, I think we're all for it. And I do think that accessing patients and maybe creating a community or even a chat room of patients, so that you throw out a question and maybe they can answer it and be real about it for you, so they can be open about their experiences. They open your eyes, actually. We had a feedback forum for the equation rollout for patients. It was hosted by the National Kidney Foundation. And I can't tell you how many of those stories really just touched me and really cemented for me why I have to work harder at getting things done. And so I would bet if you created some sort of a network chat system, you would probably get a lot of more very genuine responses to what we're doing here, and they will help guide. I think patients exactly know their minds and exactly know what they need and are very open if you ask them.
Yeah, one of the things that I can take you through based on that feedback was again, going back to GFR. I know it's not, so we use GFR as a metric of, different stages of kidney disease. And initially we're saying we want to create a replacement kidney. So let's not put absolute number, just 100% GFR is what we're aiming for. But then based on this patient feedback and obviously talking with folks in your community, what we got to learn was that yes, it would be great to have something that gives you 100% GFR. But even if you're able to provide 30% of what they currently get and they're not on dialysis, that's still a significant benefit. And so what I came up with that is, okay, maybe I shouldn't aim for that. I can deliver that with the technology that's more readily available than pushing the limits of the technology to get 100% GFR. Go to 30%. Get them mobile, they're off dialysis, and then have the nephrology community work with the patients to maintain their health.
Yeah, I mean, if you are elderly, and for me at the VA, elderly is defined like well into the 70s, and you have chronic kidney disease, you're on dialysis. An estimated kidney function of between 20 and 30 can keep you off dialysis for a very, very long time. Some patients can just outlive their kidney disease with a kidney function estimation of 20 to 30. So yeah, I agree. I think the bar of getting an estimated glomerular filtration rate of 120 mils per minute, which for those folks out there, that is the quote unquote gold standard kidney function. It's 120. But really, there are also folks out there who are walking around with only one kidney and technically with half their kidney function and will never be on dialysis. Their kidney function is something like 60. And a kidney function of 30 most definitely is a perfectly fine kidney function rate if you're an older person. If you're a younger person, you might need a little more, but probably just regular maintenance follow-up may also help with that. It gets a little detailed and nuanced when you are experiencing other stresses in life, such as, if you're a young woman and you have kidney disease and you want to have a baby, it might be a little different, but not entirely unmanageable. I'll say that.
No, thank you. This is obviously very interesting. I see. Hey, Liz, I know we've been talking and I can continue talking a lot more, but maybe we should give an opportunity for questions. Liz, if you want to come online, tell us what's going on. You may be muted. Okay.
All right, I'm back. Yes, great conversation. Thank you both so much. And we do have a lot of questions coming in. And one kind of on the same topic, there is a audience member who's wondering, function-wise, will the iBAK be better than peritoneal dialysis?
All right, so let me take this the way we have interpreted the way of doing it. And obviously, the nephrologist who can give and who should give a perspective. So when you think in terms of engineering a device, what is you come up with a user needs. What do the patients need? And I'm calling that user needs from the sort of engineering perspective. And then you come up with specifications. And as I've said, what we are trying to get at is the first version of the device should be totally implanted device that allows the patient to be mobile. That was a key element that we heard, was mobility. But at the same time, not be burdened with an external connection. So we said, okay, should be totally implantable. Then we thought, what is the level of GFR you need? And based on conversations with colleagues of Cynthia, others, we came up with a number, aim for 20 to 30. If able to provide a device that can provide 20 to 30 milliliters of ultrafiltration continuously and is totally implanted, you allow the patient to be mobile, you might be able to then provide a significant level of quality of life and potentially even health benefits beyond what dialysis provides and the challenges that associate with dialysis. So that's our specification. So Cynthia, how does that compare with PD? And then how does this compare with sort of what HD or might?
Well, I'll say that the peritoneal dialysis is a totally different method for clearance. And I'm not sure that you can directly compare them in the way that I think the question raises, like which one's better. To me, it's about having options to tailor. And so in other words, the ultimate goal is to keep everyone at home. And maybe for some folks, the peritoneal dialysis program might be better. It might be more convenient for whatever reason, depending on who you are and what's going on. And then for other folks, the iBAK might be better. And so I think that the truth is that we need to have options for a home program that will have multiple fits for multiple people, multiple different, and then, flexibility with being able to go from one program to another should we need that at some point. So I'll say that they're not comparable in the clinical sense in my mind, because it depends on the individual's need. And one shoe may not fit the other person's foot. So we'll see. That's what I think.
Great answer. That makes sense. Thank you. And there's a lot of curiosity in the chat about when trials might start and what might make a good candidate for clinical trials.
Sure. So we are, as I've said on this forum before and on our other social media postings, we're not around clinical trials yet, and we may not be for some time. Again, to recap, where are we? So what we've done is we've shown a proof of concept of the iBAK, implantable bioartificial kidney, where we've put together a mechanical filter with cell therapy and shown that we can produce urine, microliters per minute and again, that for a very short period of time, a few days in an animal. we need to move to milliliters per minute before even we can consider getting to thinking about clinical trials. What that takes is refining the technology for scale up. So instead of microliters of urine, you're going to have to produce some milliliters of urine. And I've said initial target is on the order of 20 to 30 milliliters per minute. Now, I'll repeat this because people say, well, how long will it take? If, again, big caveat, if there's the sufficient funding, and I always put that because I want people to understand that is a challenge. The actual work plan is probably 3 to 4 years of concerted effort to do all the preclinical work and maybe do the initial pilot study. There's a whole subsequent clinical trial for efficacy, going through the full FDA process that we know from other medical devices can take a few more years. In the best case scenario, if nothing goes wrong, all the funding is available. With those caveats, it could be as the first clinical trial could go as fast as 4 years, 3 to 4 years, depending. And that's the first clinical trial is just showing that it's safe and produces urine in a very select group of patients. We then have to expand the clinical studies into a larger population. And of course, that takes additional years. Let me stop there.
Thank you.
So Shuvo, can I ask you, when you explained it to me, I started thinking about like what other things in the world have like kind of gone through like that kind of a process. And the first thing I thought about is the light bulb, right? It's like the light bulb was created and engineered many years ago, over 100 years, right? But the first light bulb could not light up a whole house, right? And it took time to engineer and refine it to the point where you could light up a whole house. And so right now we're at a stage where potentially the lighting of the whole house, if you will, part is probably a few years away, but we're making the right steps moving in that direction. Is that what you were trying to say?
Yeah, and absolutely right. And I think, it's a staged approach. And I think at some level as an engineer, you always want to be doing this systematically.
Right.
And I call this the engineering approach because there's a process. When you build a pacemaker, an artificial heart, orthopedic implant, you go through a systematic process and you iterate, you learn things from the iteration. Ultimately, you get to a ventricular assist device, a mechanical heart pump that is now approved, not just for bridge to transplant, but as a destination therapy, meaning it should be. And patients have lived for 15, 20 years.
Right. You certainly don't want to come up with something that would be harmful in the end. So it does take time to make sure that everything is the way you expect it to be before you test it out.
Yeah, and that's why you have to go through this iterative process. And you always want to make sure you never compromise safety, but then you also want to make sure you're not going down the path of, which is what some of the patients, down the path of perfect, of safe, but doesn't have to be perfect function.
Yeah.
Thank you. So building off that topic a little bit, Dr. Delgado, could you maybe talk a little bit about what the referral process might be like once trials start and the artificial kidney is ready to be tested? What will that be like for patients in terms of navigating who might be eligible? I know you can't really speak to the specific eligibility criteria yet, but to give people a sense of how that might work.
Okay, so generally speaking, when we get approval to do a project like this, a research trial like this, we need to also jump through the hoops of making sure that the IRB approves the work and the way we're going to do the testing. That means there's a governing body that does oversight on making sure that we have exhaustively made sure that all of the safety concerns have been addressed, and that it is a fair and reasonable test to do in an individual, and that we're ready to get to that step. Once that happens, then the trial will be posted on a clinicaltrials.gov website for folks to see, and there'll be some advertising for potential volunteers. Potential volunteers will either do one or two things. We'll send out a request to nephrologists across the catchment area that we'll be doing the testing in to get treating nephrologist approval. then you will sign a consent form that gives us permission to do this study with you. And then I imagine that some folks we might do a very small pilot testing first, and then roll out to a larger cohort of individuals, group of individuals who will be willing to volunteer themselves to do the testing. The testing itself will require a lot of communication with the research team to make sure that you're doing well. And for that reason, we have to, like I said, set up the right benchmarks for the IRB, the review board, to make sure that everything is safe. So it takes some time. The research projects I've run in the past have not been as large as this one. And even with that, it took about 6 to 8 months to get IRB approval just to get someone to fill out a survey. So imagine it's testing out a piece of equipment that's going to be implanted in someone. It's going to take some time. But I do think that because we're at an institution where this sort of work kind of happens all around us fairly swiftly, things will happen in a fair pace. I'll say that. Does that chime with the things you've done, Shuvo?
Well, we have certainly gone to the IRB. So for the people out there, the ethics review board at UCSF, and we want to talk about the process to get to the first testing, and they told us the kind of data they would need, which we learned was different than what we had anticipated. So this was pre-pandemic, and we started getting ready to get all that together. I went back to, and one of the things they wanted was something called a statement from the FDA that allows us to go and test. It's called IDE. Again, for the people in the know, it's called individual device exemption. And so we are in the process to get the IDE for the very first evaluation of the safety of the materials. And then we got sort of derailed by the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So we are picking up, but it jives with pretty much everything you've said in terms of process. I'd be curious, Cynthia, a patient comes to you, whether it's iBAK or not, but what would you evaluate in them to decide they should get an implanted type of device, or maybe, let me just put it this way, that they're suitable enough for a device that can be delivered via an operation versus one that says, no, operation may be too much of a burden on you?
I would probably think about the person's, just like any other surgical intervention, I would think about their suitability for an operative procedure. Number one, the level of frailty, and their burden of other comorbidities. So I would probably think about whether they have severe heart failure or, other, multiple stroke history. I'm not sure I would want to, risk someone, because then I'm thinking about a clinical risk in the individual. I wouldn't want someone who's very, very, very sick trying out a new device that might end up hurting them in the long run. So, off the top of my head, I would probably exclude folks who have advanced class heart disease and heart failure, malignancy history, individuals who may not be able to understand the instructions in the process. So folks who have dementia or some form of mental status change that may make it hard. But by and large, that's not the majority of patients with kidney disease. By and large, the majority of patients with kidney disease are just working, living, hardworking individuals who are probably in the middle age. So, I would think about the folks who are very, very frail. And then if I would swing in the other direction, I would think about kids and whether or not this would affect their growth potential. We'd have to maybe do an assessment of the appropriateness for folks who are in the age category of 18 to 25, given that growth continues through age 25.
And this is actually exactly the kind of input that would want to start thinking about early on. So we identify where we might start, what changes we may at some point want to consider. So you brought up the idea of kids. So we do get people asking us about, can this benefit pediatrics? And in principle, I would want to say yes, but is that the place would start? I don't know that that's the place would start.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I wouldn't start there. I also wouldn't start with someone who is family planning either. If you want to have a baby sometime, I wouldn't encourage you to participate in this right now.
That's really helpful for people. Thank you.
Yeah.
And shifting gears a little bit, there's been some ideas that people have mentioned about ways to fundraise for this to make it happen. And so one person asked, how can corporations help with fundraising? Another person suggested doing a GoFundMe. Another person suggested contacting celebrities who have had transplants. So maybe, Shuvo, you can talk a little bit about fundraising efforts so far, and then Dr. Delgado, feel free to chime in on ideas you have.
No, absolutely. So I think people who know us know that we've talked about ways to move the project faster and forward, and it's really part of it is funds. Dr. Cynthia has made the point about more NIH funding, and frankly, there's not enough money at NIH for kidney research. Forget iBAK. The American Society of Nephrology did an assessment, and they found that for every kidney disease patient, NIH spends about $20. For every cancer patient, that's almost $1,000.
Right.
So think about that. And as we have talked about in this forum before, the mortality, the death rates of dialysis patients is higher than many cancers.
Yeah.
So one is, of course, advocate for, write to your congresspersons, write to those folks in government who can advocate for increased funding. But we also rely a lot on philanthropy. Much of the work we've done has been, again, donations, grants from foundations and individuals. If you know people who have the capacity and they have money that they want to give to charitable cause, advancing the development of the artificial kidney should be one of the places they look at. If you're part of a company that has a corporate cause that they pick up every year, think about us. And if you have friends and family that are thinking about, hey, we want to do something good and make a difference, we again here. These are all ways we've seen this work. People have done it. Now, we need lots of money, but we've been able to get money that keeps us moving forward, and every bit has helped. And we use that money to advance from one step to the next. And what I'd like to see is an acceleration of the funds coming in between government and private sources, so we can move forward to a point where Cynthia can actually say, okay, patient A, come in, let's have a conversation about this.
Yes, so it takes a village to make mountains move. So I do think that we need a collaborative effort between industry, government resources, and private citizens to help support moving this needle, moving the needle to get us closer to having an option for kidney disease patients that hasn't existed in the past. So yeah.
Great, thank you. And there's another question from the chat about the Lebanese doctor who recently announced that they had created an artificial kidney, and people are wondering if that's similar to our device or what's the deal with that? Yeah,
so I don't know that Cynthia knows, but a few weeks ago, there's something in the press about a Lebanese doctor who said that they're working on artificial kidney, and we haven't really seen anything. I was at the American Society of Nephrology a few weeks ago, asked people about it. They have not published in a scientific journal. They have not communicated in a scientific forum. Sometimes you can communicate in a forum. So all we saw was that one article. And just to be clear to everybody, they use terminology in that article that is very similar to what we have used, but we do not know them. And obviously, I'm excited whenever other people are working on artificial kidney technologies, but they're not really part of us.
Yeah, I mean, this is the cool part of science, where multiple people are interested in coming to a solution and participating in the solution, which I think is tremendous. But I will caution, I'll say that we have to do this very methodically, scientifically, and make sure that there is utmost adherence to safety. And I agree. I think when we hear that something's been recently engineered, the first question is, let's see if it can actually be reproduced before we jump on a bandwagon. And so you want to make sure that despite the fact that everyone is working towards the same end, and we want to encourage everyone to get in on trying to find the solution. We also want to make sure that it's done in a scientifically sound way with adherence to all of the rules and regulations that govern science, that make sure that there is safety in everything that we do. So.
Thank you. And I think we're just about at the hour, and I think that's a perfect place to wrap it up. So thank you all so much for joining us. We will be back next month. In the meantime, you can follow us on Instagram and watch our recordings on YouTube and donate. And we really appreciate all of you. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.